April 1945, Eastern Germany. The maps still show lines and arrows, but the ground no longer obeys them. Artillery rolls across the countryside with a dull, closing rhythm, closer than official broadcasts admit, closer than anyone was prepared to accept. The war, which for years had been something heard on radios or read in headlines, has reached the villages without asking permission. At first light, a 16-year-old boy wakes to shouting outside his home. The words are sharp, unfamiliar, and instantly frightening. He does not need a translation. The tone is enough. It is the sound of authority spoken by strangers, carried on voices that do not hesitate. For months, he has been told the front is stable, that defenses exist somewhere to the east. But the voices outside do not sound lost. They sound certain. The collapse has come faster than promised, faster than warnings, faster than evacuation orders that never arrived. Only days ago, officials insisted the Red Army would be held at the Oder. Now, Soviet units are moving through towns that were never meant to see them, advancing street by street, house by house, with a discipline sharpened by 4 years of total war. This is not chaos. It is method. Inside the house, adults argue in low, urgent tones. They debate whether to stay or wait, whether the rumors are exaggerated, whether the soldiers outside will pass through or remain. The boy listens without speaking. He understands something the others do not, or perhaps something they are afraid to admit. Delay is no longer caution. Delay is exposure. He moves quickly. There is no packing, no careful selection of what to take. There is no time for memory. He leaves behind photographs, clothes, school books, objects that belong to a life already ending. What he carries instead is instinct and a single direction, away from the sound that is growing louder with every minute. Outside, the street is empty in a way that feels deliberate. Doors are shut, windows dark. And beneath it all is a new presence, barely audible but unmistakable. Boots on pavement, not running, not scattered, measured. Approaching. War does not always announce itself with explosions. Sometimes it arrives more quietly, one step at a time. And as the boy turns his back on his home, he does not yet know that this sound, this moment, is only the beginning of a journey that will test how far survival can stretch before it breaks. The boy moves through neighborhoods that no longer recognize themselves. Streets are broken not just by shell fire, but by absence of police, of officials, of any voice that once claimed responsibility. Authority has not been replaced. It has simply fractured. In its place is a silence, broken only by orders shouted from unfamiliar mouths and the occasional crack of distant gunfire. Uniforms are everywhere, but they no longer mean what they once did. To wear one is not to protect, but to command. To resist is unthinkable. Soldiers move in small groups, alert, unsmiling, their weapons carried not for display but for use. Civilians avert their eyes as they pass. In this city, attention itself has become dangerous. Arrests happen without explanation. A man is pulled from a doorway and marched away. A woman argues too loudly and disappears around a corner, her voice cut short. No charges are read, no destinations named. The boy watches from doorways and rubble piles, learning quickly that questions invite notice, and notice invites risk. Rumors travel faster than any official word ever did. Whispers speak of reprisals for collaboration, of lists compiled hastily, of camps somewhere beyond the horizon where people are sent and never seen again. No one knows which stories are true. That hardly matters. In a city without rules, fear does not wait for confirmation. Survival becomes a private calculation, made moment by moment. Which street to avoid, when to speak, when to remain invisible. The boy understands now that ideology has no value here. It cannot shield him. It cannot feed him. It cannot explain what is happening. What remains is instinct, sharpened by observation and restraint. There is no ceremony to mark the end of childhood, no single moment that announces it. It fades instead, eroded by what is seen, by what is not explained, by the quiet knowledge that no one is coming to restore order. In its place grows something colder and more precise. Fear fills the space where belief once lived, and as the boy moves deeper into the city, he begins to sense that what surrounds him is not simply the aftermath of defeat, but the opening phase of a new and unpredictable struggle, one that will demand more than silence to survive. The roads fill before the day is fully awake. Carts, bicycles, handcarts, and columns of people move without order, all fleeing in different directions for the same reason. Families carry what they can, abandoning the rest where it falls. There is no longer a sense of destination, only motion, driven by the shared understanding that to remain still is to be overtaken. At the main intersections, Soviet armor stands where signposts once guided traffic. Tanks idle across crossroads with the quiet confidence of machines that have already won. Soldiers wave civilians away from routes that lead east, not with explanation, but with finality. The boy watches one such exchange from a distance and understands immediately. The obvious paths are closed. The war has learned how people think. It becomes clear that borders no longer exist in any meaningful sense. Lines drawn on maps have been erased by movement of divisions, of refugees, of fear. What once separated regions, languages, and authorities has collapsed into a single occupied space. There is no direction that promises safety. There is only the question of how long one can avoid attention. He abandons what little planning he had left. Maps are useless now, either outdated or openly dangerous. Instead, he begins to read the land itself. He follows tree lines rather than roads, shadows rather than signs. Rivers become barriers and guides, at once slowing pursuit, forcing decisions. Forests offer cover but demand silence. Ruins provide shelter, but only briefly. The terrain becomes an ally, but an unreliable one. Each choice carries risk. A wrong turn can lead to a checkpoint, a patrol, or worse, another group of desperate civilians whose presence draws notice. The boy learns to move quickly, to rest only when exhaustion demands it, to listen more than he looks. He believes speed will save him, that if he moves fast enough, quietly enough, he can stay ahead of whatever's advancing behind him. It is a belief born of youth and necessity, reinforced by every kilometer survived. And yet, as night falls and the sounds of engines echo across the landscape, it becomes clear that speed alone cannot outrun a war that has already closed the distance. He is wrong, but not entirely, because while speed will not grant escape, it will carry him far enough to face a choice he does not yet know he will have to make. To understand the fear that moved ahead of the Red Army in April 1945, one must understand the distance it had already traveled. From the frozen ruins of Stalingrad to the outskirts of Berlin, Soviet forces had advanced more than 1,000 miles through devastation few armies in history had endured. Entire cities had been erased behind them, entire generations buried. This was not simply an army on the move. It was an accumulation of loss given direction. That loss was measured in numbers almost beyond comprehension. Millions killed, millions more wounded or displaced. Entire divisions rebuilt again and again from the remnants of the last. Discipline, under such conditions, hardened into something severe. Mercy became inconsistent. Ruthlessness, often, was indistinguishable from survival. The Red Army did not advance with illusion. It advanced with memory. German civilians understood this, even if only in fragments and rumor. What they feared was not occupation alone, but reckoning. Stories moved westward faster than any unit of reprisals, of violence committed without warning, of justice delivered unevenly and sometimes indiscriminately. Whether all were true mattered less than the belief that some were. Fear does not require precision. It requires plausibility. Official orders from Soviet command were clear on paper. Civilians were to be protected. Looting and abuse forbidden. Discipline enforced. But between order and action lay interpretation, exhaustion, anger, and opportunity. An army that had seen its own villages burn did not always distinguish cleanly between combatant and consequence. Control weakened as the front widened. In this calculus, age offered no guarantee. Teenagers were no longer children in war's accounting. Many had worn uniforms months earlier. Some still did. Others carried the physical markers of military life boots, haircuts, posture that could invite suspicion. The line between boy and soldier had been blurred long before April 1945 arrived. The boy begins to understand how he might be seen, not as himself, not as a child fleeing danger, but as a possibility, a question, a risk to be resolved quickly rather than examined carefully. In a war defined by momentum, hesitation was dangerous. Decisions were made in seconds. Explanations were rare. This realization changes the way he moves. He avoids open ground, not only to stay hidden, but to avoid being misread. He learns that survival now depends not just on speed or silence, but on perception, on how one appears to those who no longer have patience for ambiguity. Belief settles into something firmer, not panic, but urgency sharpened by understanding. The Red Army is not a rumor or an idea. It is a force shaped by suffering, advancing with purpose and indifferent to individual stories caught in its path. And as the boy presses on, guided by this knowledge, he does not yet realize that his growing urgency will soon force him into the most dangerous choice of all, not how to hide, but whether hiding will be enough when the war finally catches up. Days lose their shape. Time is no longer measured by hours or dates, but by light and darkness, by movement and stillness. The boy travels when he can and hides when he must, his progress marked not on maps but in the slow accumulation of fatigue. Each mile feels earned. Each pause feels dangerous. Food is no longer something prepared or chosen. It is scavenged where it can be found, potatoes left in frozen fields, crusts abandoned in empty houses, whatever can be eaten quickly and without fire. Hunger becomes constant, a dull pressure that sharpens thought even as it weakens the body. Sleep is taken in fragments, stolen from ruins or tree cover, never deep enough to fully rest. He learns to listen not for sound, but for its absence. The sudden quiet of birds lifting, the unnatural stillness that suggests men nearby, trained to move without noise. The war has taught him that danger rarely announces itself. It reveals itself in what disappears. Soviet patrols move through the countryside with the confidence of victory. Their pace is unhurried, their formations loose but purposeful. They are not searching desperately. They are advancing. When vehicles pass, engines low and steady, the boy presses himself into earth and shadow, counting the seconds until the noise fades and the ground seems safe again. Each encounter avoided feels like a delay, not an escape. He understands now that he is moving through a space already claimed, even if it is not fully controlled. The sense of being hunted is replaced by something more precise, the knowledge that he is simply out of place and that time is working against him. Hope contracts. It no longer stretches toward distant safety or imagined reunions. It narrows to the next mile, the next crossing, the next hour without discovery. The future becomes a series of short horizons, each one contingent on the last. Escape, once an idea, becomes a physical discipline. He learns how to move without leaving traces, how to ration strength, how to endure discomfort without reacting to it. The body adapts where belief once operated. Survival becomes procedural. And yet, beneath the discipline, something fragile remains, a sense that this cannot continue indefinitely, that the distance he is covering, however carefully, is finite. As the nights grow colder and the patrols closer, the boy approaches a moment when endurance will no longer be enough, and when remaining unseen may require more than silence and motion. The river appears without warning, wide and swollen from spring melt, cutting across the landscape like a final argument. It moves quickly, carrying branches and debris, its surface broken and cold. On the far bank lies westward ground, but the distance between here and there might as well be greater. For the first time in days, the boy is forced to stop. The bridges that once spanned the river are gone. Some lie collapsed into the current, their metal twisted and useless. Others remain intact but watched guarded by soldiers who understand exactly why civilians would want to cross. The crossings have become points of control, and control has become the currency of the advance. To attempt a crossing here, in the open, would mean exposure. A figure in the water draws attention even from far away. Movement breaks concealment. The river offers no cover, only cold and resistance. Yet to remain on this side is no longer neutral. Patrols are closer now. The sound of engines at night is more frequent. Staying means being found. He waits through the night, pressed into damp ground near the bank, listening to the water and the distant movements beyond it. The cold seeps upward, numbing his hands, stiffening his legs. Sleep does not come. Instead, he measures time by the sky's slow shift and the realization that darkness, which has protected him so far, cannot last. At dawn, the landscape changes. Mist rises from the water, softening the far bank but offering no true concealment. Light reveals what night hid. The boy understands that waiting longer will only narrow his options. The river will not recede. The patrols will not disappear. Indecision becomes its own danger. The decision arrives without ceremony. He removes what little he carries that could weigh him down. He studies the current, the angle of drift, the line of trees opposite. He does not think in terms of success or failure, only of necessity. Survival, he has learned, is rarely about choosing well. It is about choosing at all. The water is colder than expected, stealing breath on contact. The current pulls immediately, turning effort into calculation. Each stroke must work with the flow, not against it. The far bank moves sideways even as it comes closer. The river demands respect, then takes it anyway. When he reaches the opposite side, exhausted and shaking, there is no relief, only continuation. He has crossed, but he has also announced himself to a world where risk cannot be undone. Survival has accepted uncertainty as its price. And as the boy disappears into the trees, the question is no longer whether danger lies ahead, but how many more such decisions his body and his resolve can still endure. The movement is small, almost accidental, a shift of weight, a branch bending where it should not. It is enough. On the edge of the riverbank, a figure straightens, helmet catching light. A voice follows, sharp and immediate, cutting through the low sounds of water and wind. The words are foreign, but the meaning is unmistakable. Stop, identify, submit. The boy freezes for a fraction of a second too long. He does not understand the language, but he understands tone. It is not a question. It is a command issued by someone accustomed to being obeyed. In that instant, every lesson learned over the past days converges into a single calculation. Stillness will not save him now. He turns and runs. The rifle cracks almost at once. The sound is flat and violent, echoing across the water. A round snaps past him, close enough to be felt rather than heard, tearing air where his head had been a moment before. The shot is not a warning. It is aimed. It misses by chance, not by intention. The ground gives way beneath his feet as he runs. Mud slick from the riverbank pulls at his boots. He stumbles, catches himself, forces his legs forward again. Breath comes hard and uneven, each inhale burning. The forest ahead offers cover, but it feels impossibly far away, separated by open ground that exposes every movement. He expects another shot. He expects it with certainty. The second round that corrects the first. The inevitable follow-up that ends the distance he is trying to create. His body moves ahead of thought now, driven by momentum and fear, no longer capable of strategy. But the second shot does not come. Minutes pass, then more. The forest remains intact, undisturbed. No footsteps follow, no dogs, no shouted orders drawing closer. The silence that returns is not the silence of safety, but it is silence all the same. Why the shot was not followed, the boy cannot know. Perhaps the soldier hesitated. Perhaps orders intervened. Perhaps another threat demanded attention. Perhaps fatigue dulled resolve. Or perhaps something more fragile entered the moment. A recognition, a calculation, a choice made too quickly to name. In war, mercy rarely announces itself. It does not arrive with explanation or clarity. It appears, if at all, in absence, in what does not happen when it easily could have. The boy understands only that he is alive and that he should not be. The encounter changes him, not with relief, but with a new awareness of randomness. Survival, he now sees, is not always earned. Sometimes it is granted without reason, withdrawn without warning. The rules he has been learning: move quietly, choose carefully, endure are necessary, but they are not sufficient. He moves deeper into the forest, slower now, every sense sharpened by the knowledge of how close the margin truly is. The war has looked directly at him, and for reasons he will never understand, looked away. Behind him, the river continues to flow, indifferent to the moment it witnessed. Ahead, the land stretches on, offering no promise that such restraint will ever be repeated. Mercy has entered the story, but it has done so without pattern or pledge. And as the boy disappears among the trees, the question that follows him is not why the shot missed, but whether the next encounter will allow the same uncertainty or demand a price that cannot be outrun. Exhaustion arrives without warning, like a physical blow. After days measured in tension and motion, the boy's body simply stops responding. Near the edge of a rural farmhouse, its walls scarred, but standing, its fields trampled by passing armies, his strength gives way. He lowers himself to the ground, unsure whether he is hiding or surrendering, and lets the world narrow to breath and heartbeat. Movement draws his attention. Figures emerge from behind the building, cautious and deliberate. Their uniforms are unfamiliar, their silhouettes different from those he has learned to avoid. Rifles come up instinctively, trained and steady. For a brief moment, the boy expects the same outcome as before, commands shouted, decisions made too quickly to escape. Then the rifles lower. The soldiers speak, but the words do not resolve into meaning. The language is foreign, yet the tone is markedly different from what he has come to expect. There is tension, yes, but not aggression. One of them steps closer, hands visible, posture alert but controlled. Another circles wide, scanning the tree line, not the boy. This is procedure, not pursuit. Language fails completely. The boy cannot explain who he is or where he has come from. He does not know which answers would be safe, even if he could. Instead, there are gestures, open palms, a shaking head, the universal sign of hunger. The soldiers exchange glances. One kneels, bringing himself level with the boy's eyes, studying his face rather than his clothing. What they see is not an enemy. There is no uniform to provoke suspicion, no weapon to confiscate. There is only exhaustion written plainly on a young face, and the unmistakable signs of prolonged hunger. The war has taught these men to be cautious, but it has not yet erased their capacity to recognize a child. He is fed before he is questioned. The order is unspoken but clear. Bread first, water next. The boy eats slowly at first, unsure whether the moment will dissolve if he moves too quickly. The food settles heavily, unfamiliar after days of scarcity. No one rushes him. No one interrupts. Only later do the questions begin, simple and measured, filtered through gestures and broken words. Name, age, where from. The boy answers as best he can, pointing, nodding, offering fragments. The soldiers listen without pressing. Some details can wait. For a brief interval, the war recedes. Not entirely, it is still present in the distance, in the uniforms, in the careful spacing of the men, but it loosens its grip. No orders are shouted. No weapons are raised again. The farmhouse, for this moment, exists outside the immediate violence that has defined every mile before it. This pause is not kind. As the light fades and the soldiers prepare to move on, the boy understands that this encounter, like the missed shot, is an exception rather than a promise. The war has paused, not concluded. Ahead lie decisions he cannot yet see, made by people he has not yet met. But for this brief moment, beneath a quiet sky and beside a battered farmhouse, survival is no longer an improvisation. It is protected temporarily by strangers who see not a symbol of the enemy, but a child caught between endings. And as the soldiers confer quietly among themselves, one question remains unresolved. What place, if any, exists for a boy like him in the world that is now taking shape beyond this pause? The decision is not immediate. Among the American soldiers, there is a pause that carries weight. War has trained them to move quickly, but also to recognize moments that demand consideration. The boy's presence creates such a moment. He is not part of the plan. He is not accounted for in any order. He exists between categories. They speak among themselves in low voices, their words deliberate. Standing orders are clear enough. Civilians are to be processed, directed, handed off to military government units when possible. Harboring a German civilian, especially one of uncertain background, carries risk. The front lines are unstable. Units shift positions daily. Command structures stretch thin. Responsibility is something to be avoided as often as it is assumed. Yet chaos favors discretion. In April 1945, the American advance is fast and uneven, moving through territory where maps lag behind reality. Decisions are often made locally, guided by judgment rather than instruction. This is one of those moments. The boy is not a threat, but neither is he invisible. To ignore him would be a choice. To help him would be another. They ask him questions again, more gently this time. He offers fragments, names of towns, references to rivers crossed, gestures that trace a path rather than explain it. His story is incomplete, shaped by fear and exhaustion, but its direction is clear. He has been running from something, not toward it. One of the soldiers listens more closely than the others. He watches the boy's hands as much as his face. He notices how thin the wrists are, how carefully the food has been eaten. At some point, his attention drifts inward. The war has a way of doing that, pulling memory into the present without warning. He remembers his younger brother, not the face exactly, but the age, the unfinished posture, the way adolescence still looks uncertain even without war pressing in. It is not sentiment that enters the calculation, but recognition. The boy is not an abstract civilian. He is a person whose life has been interrupted at a point that feels familiar. The discussion resumes, quieter now. Risk is weighed against consequence. They consider what might happen if they move on and leave him behind. They consider what might happen if they take him with them, even briefly. There is no option that fully satisfies the rule. The choice, when it comes, is made without ceremony. No vote is taken. No order is written. One soldier simply nods. Another begins preparing a place for the night. Compassion does not announce itself as defiance. It presents itself as a temporary adjustment. For one night, policy bends. Not in principle, but in practice. The boy is allowed to stay. He is given a blanket, a corner near the farmhouse wall, a measure of protection that lasts only as long as the unit remains. No promises are made. No future is outlined. The soldiers understand that this choice will not change the war. It will not redeem anything that has been lost. It is small, contained, and fragile, but it is also real. In a conflict defined by scale and destruction, it is an assertion that individual judgment still matters. As darkness settles and the perimeter is quietly secured, the boy sleeps more deeply than he has in days. The war does not end while he rests. It moves on, as it always does. By morning, the choice to help will be tested by movement, orders, and consequence. And when the sun rises, the Americans will have to decide whether compassion was a momentary pause or the beginning of responsibility they can no longer set aside. The decision is implemented quietly, before doubt has time to return. At first, light, the unit prepares to move, and the boy is guided toward a supply vehicle parked behind the farmhouse. It is not explained to him in full. It does not need to be. The gestures are enough. Stay low. Stay silent. Do not move unless told. Inside the vehicle, the air smells of canvas, oil, and dust. Crates are stacked tightly. The road ahead is uncertain. Though the Americans are advancing, the lines are not clean. Pockets of Soviet control overlap with Western movement, especially along key roads and crossings. Checkpoints appear and disappear with little notice. Authority is asserted locally, enforced by whoever arrives first and stays longest. For a hidden passenger, each mile carries its own calculation. The vehicle slows. Voices outside. Boots on gravel. The boy stiffens, counting seconds without knowing why. He imagines the canvas pulled back, the light cutting through his shelter, the hands that will reach in and end the journey without explanation. Above him, an American soldier speaks calmly, presenting papers, answering questions with practiced ease. At the checkpoint, Soviet soldiers move deliberately. Faces are scanned, not hurriedly, but with the patience of men who expect compliance. They look not only at documents, but at posture, at hesitation, at the small signs that suggest something out of place. The vehicle is motionless now. The engine idles. Time stretches thin. A voice asks a question. Another responds. The exchange is brief, but the pause that follows feels longer than it is. Inside the vehicle, the boy controls his breathing, shallow and measured, aware that sound carries easily in confined spaces. The world reduces itself to waiting. This is the moment where chance and judgment intersect. The soldier at the checkpoint circles once, glancing at the cargo without interest. Supply vehicles are familiar. They mean routine, logistics, continuity. Wars depend on them. They are less interesting than men with weapons or civilians with nowhere to go. A hand gestures forward. The vehicle lurches back into motion. The road opens ahead, uninterrupted. The checkpoint recedes into distance without pursuit, without a second look. No one speaks inside the cab. No one celebrates. The moment is not acknowledged, as if to do so might undo it. Miles pass before the boy allows himself to breathe fully. Even then, it is cautious, tentative, as though the decision could still be reversed by some unseen authority. Only when the landscape changes, when the sound of engines and voices shifts in character, does the tension begin to loosen. Escape. Once a concept measured in hope and rumor becomes tangible, not complete, not guaranteed, but real enough to feel, the boy understands that he has crossed more than terrain. He has passed through a space where his fate could have been decided by a glance, and was not. For the soldiers, the moment registers differently. It is one checkpoint among many, one calculation that happened to resolve favorably. But even they feel the release of it later, when the danger has moved safely behind them and the road ahead seems briefly uncomplicated. The boy remains hidden until well past the point of necessity. When he finally emerges, blinking in daylight, the world looks altered, not kinder, but navigable. The war has not ended. It still surrounds him, but it has, for the first time, failed to close the distance in time. What lies ahead is still uncertain. Papers will be needed. Authorities will ask questions. Decisions will be made that cannot be delayed forever. Yet the turning point has been crossed. The pursuit that defined every step before has lost its immediacy. As the vehicle continues westward, carrying supplies and an unrecorded life between its crates, one truth settles quietly into place. Escape is no longer something he is attempting. It is something he is actively accomplishing, one controlled mile at a time. The journey ends without announcement. The supply vehicle slows, turns once more, and rolls into a compound that bears the quiet markings of order returning in fragments. A refugee center, temporary, improvised, already strained, operates behind wire and handwritten signs. It is not safety in the absolute sense. It is administration. And in the spring of 1945, that is often the closest thing available. The boy is guided down from the vehicle, blinking again as his feet touch ground. Around him are others like him, displaced civilians gathered by chance and circumstance rather than plan. Some sit on crates. Some stand in loose lines. All carry the same uncertain stillness of people waiting to be told what comes next. An American clerk begins the process with practiced efficiency. Names are asked for, ages approximated, places of origin written phonetically, often incorrectly. The boy answers as best he can, but language remains an obstacle, and exhaustion blurs details that once felt fixed. His name is recorded slightly wrong. His hometown placed on the wrong side of a river. No one pauses to correct it. These errors are not malicious. They are structural. The war has produced too many lives to catalog carefully. The system records what it can, quickly, before the next arrival demands attention. The boy understands instinctively that what is written here will follow him, shaping decisions made by people he will never meet. The Americans who brought him do not linger. Their role has reached its limit. Orders pull them forward again, back into motion. There is no ceremony marking the transfer, no formal acknowledgement of what has been risked or given. The war does not allow for such things. One soldier pauses anyway. He steps forward, extends a hand. The gesture is simple, unadorned. The boy hesitates, then takes it. The handshake is brief, firm, practiced in adult motion offered to someone who has been forced to grow too quickly. No words are exchanged. None are necessary. War teaches brevity. It compresses meaning into gestures and leaves explanations behind. The handshake contains no promise, no assurance of reunion or memory. It is an acknowledgement, and nothing more. Then the soldier turns away. The boy watches as the men who carried him this far disappear back into their vehicle, their shapes receding into the movement of the front. Their lives will continue along paths defined by units, orders, and objectives. His will be shaped by forms, placements, and the slow machinery of post-war uncertainty. There is no clear future waiting inside the refugee center, only questions deferred rather than answered. Where he will be sent, whether family can be located, what citizenship will mean when borders have shifted and names have been misspelled. The war may be ending, but its consequences are just beginning to take form. As evening approaches, the boy is assigned a place among strangers, a bunk, a ration, instructions he partially understands. The constant urgency that once governed every step begins to loosen, replaced by something quieter and more unsettling. waiting. Lives diverge here without closure. The Americans move on. The boy remains. Their connection dissolves into memory almost as soon as it is formed. No record links them. No photograph captures the exchange. History will not note the decision that bridged their paths. And yet, the handoff marks a turning point, as definitive as any crossing or escape. The boy is no longer moving through the war on instinct alone. He has entered its aftermath, where survival depends less on speed and silence, and more on patience and chance. What happens next will not be decided by a single moment of mercy, but by systems still struggling to understand what to do with those who have outlived the fighting. And as night settles over the refugee center, one question hangs unresolved. In a world rebuilding itself from fragments, where does a boy like him truly belong? Survival does not arrive as a single moment of relief. It unfolds slowly, unevenly, across years that carry the weight of what came before. The boy grows into adulthood in a Germany that no longer exists, as it once did, divided not only by borders, but by memory, ideology, and the unspoken need to move forward without fully understanding how. The country rebuilt itself with remarkable speed. Streets are cleared, schools reopen. New governments form with new language and new promises. But survival, for those who lived too close to the collapse, does not follow the same timetable. The war remains present not as noise or danger, but as recollection. Memory sharpens instead of fading, revisiting moments that were once endured without reflection. The river does not disappear, nor does the sound of the rifle crack that did not finish its work. The faces of soldiers both feared and trusted remain precise in the mind long after other details blur. Survival has preserved these moments intact, as if they are still waiting to be resolved. Gratitude becomes complicated. It exists, undeniable and constant, but unresolved. There is no address to send it to, no name written correctly enough to trace. The Americans who intervened pass into abstraction, real but unreachable. The boy grows older, knowing that his life turned not on strategy or merit, but on decisions made quietly by strangers who expected nothing in return. Across the ocean, those strangers return home. They resume lives, interrupted by war, jobs reclaimed, families rejoined, futures resumed. What they carry back with them is rarely spoken of. Among the large stories of campaigns and victories, moments like this one find no place. They exist instead as private recollection. Time moves on, as it always does. The war becomes subject matter, then curriculum, then distant reference. New generations learn dates and outcomes without feeling the uncertainty that once defined each mile. The world rearranges itself, confident in the belief that such chaos belongs to the past. But survival leaves questions that do not dissolve with time. Why one life is spared and another is not. Why a decision made in seconds can echo across decades. Whether survival itself carries obligation to remember, to speak, to bear witness to what could easily have gone unrecorded. The boy, now a man, understands that his life has been shaped as much by restraint as by action. By what did not happen. By a shot not followed, a vehicle waved through, a rule bent for one night. These absences define his survival more than any single event. History continues forward, indifferent to the individual paths it crosses. Yet within its vast movement, there are quiet intersections where choices briefly alter its course for one person alone. What survival looks like after war is not triumph or clarity. It is continuity, carried carefully, marked by unanswered questions rather than conclusions. And as the years pass, the man understands that the war never truly ends for those who lived inside its margins. It simply changes shape, settling into memory, waiting to be acknowledged for what it gave and what it withheld. Decades pass without announcement. They arrive not as milestones, but as accumulation years layered one atop another under changing flags, currencies, and systems of belief. The man lives his life in a country repeatedly redefined by forces beyond his control. Governments change, borders harden, then soften. Ideologies rise with confidence and retreat without apology. Through it all, the war recedes from public urgency, becoming history rather than condition. Yet silence does not mean forgetting. For him, memory does not dull with time. It reorganizes itself. What once arrived as fear returns as detail. The sound of boots at dawn grows clearer, not fainter. The pause after the missed shot stretches longer in recollection than it ever did in reality. Survival has given him time, and time has sharpened what survival preserved. For years, there is no space to ask questions. Life demands participation. Work must be found, family built, a future assembled from what remains. Gratitude is carried quietly, without destination. There is no obvious path back to those who altered his life so briefly and so completely. The war's paperwork is scattered. Names were misspelled. Units moved on. Silence settles not by choice, but by structure. Then, slowly, the world changes again. Archives begin to open. Documents once sealed are cataloged and released, imperfectly but deliberately. Borders soften. Travel becomes possible in ways that once seemed permanent fiction. The rigid divisions of the Cold War begin to loosen, replaced by caution. Years pass again. The search continues intermittently, shaped by opportunity and fatigue. There are moments when he considers stopping, accepting that the silence may remain permanent, but gratitude, unresolved, does not allow itself to be abandoned. It waits. One day, a response arrives that is different in tone. Not conclusive, but attentive. A name is mentioned that aligns roughly with memory. A unit stationed in the correct region. A date that does not contradict his own recollection. The information is incomplete, but it narrows the distance. The man follows it carefully, aware that expectation can distort memory as easily as fear once did. He cross-references what he can, writes again, waits again. The process repeats itself, slow, methodical, uncertain. What he discovers, eventually, is not a perfect match, but something close enough to matter. A likely candidate, a possible rescuer whose service record places him on that road, in that month, with that unit. The certainty he seeks remains just out of reach, but the possibility is real. The realization brings no surge of triumph, only quiet acknowledgement. The man understands that confirmation may never be absolute, that memory and record will always fail to overlap completely. The past resists being pinned down, even by those who lived inside it. What matters, he realizes, is not proof, but intention. The act of searching has bridged something that silence once held apart. It has allowed him to place gratitude where it belongs, not necessarily in the hands of a single, named individual, but within a broader truth about choice and restraint. The 50 years of silence do not end with an answer. They end with acceptance, not resignation, but understanding. That survival created a debt not meant to be repaid directly, that some actions exist solely within the moment they are made, leaving no trace except consequence. The man closes his files and letters, not because the search is finished, but because it has reached its natural limit. The past has given him what it can. The rest must remain unanswered. History continues forward, unchanged by his efforts. But within it, a quiet correction has been made. The silence that once surrounded his survival now contains meaning, if not resolution. And as the years advance, the man carries this understanding with him, that the war did not only test endurance and strength, but the willingness to act without recognition, and that some of the most decisive moments in history are the ones that leave no record at all, except the life that continues because of them. The phone call comes without ceremony. It is brief, cautious, almost formal, as if both sides fear that speaking too freely might collapse what has taken decades to assemble. Names are exchanged slowly. Dates are repeated. Locations tested against memory. Each confirmation tightens a thread that has remained loose for more than half a century. When understanding finally settles, it does so quietly. The man sits in silence after the call ends, aware that something long unfinished has begun to close. Across the ocean, another man does the same, older now, removed from the uniform that once defined him, holding a memory he had never expected to revisit so directly. Arrangements follow. Travel is discussed with practical restraint. No one speaks of destiny or reunion. This is not sentiment. It is acknowledgement. Two lives, briefly aligned by war, are preparing to occupy the same space again under circumstances neither could have imagined in 1945. When they meet, it is without uniforms or insignia. There are no ranks to distinguish them, no weapons to shape posture. They approach one another as elderly men, carrying the visible evidence of time's slower movement, lined faces, hands that no longer steady themselves automatically. Yet when they speak, the distance collapses. They sit together and return to a single night. Not dramatically, not in sequence. Memory does not unfold neatly after 50 years. It arrives in fragments, sensations recalled before events, pauses remembered more vividly than actions. The blanket, the vehicle, the silence at the checkpoint. Each detail is offered tentatively, then confirmed by the other with a nod or a quiet word. Face his aju. Memories do not. The soldier listens as the man speaks of what followed the refugee center, the divided country, the years of rebuilding lived under shifting systems. He hears, for the first time, the full outcome of a choice that once seemed momentary. He learns that the boy did not disappear into abstraction. He became a life complex, ordinary, shaped by the absence of an ending. The realization settles heavily, not as pride, but as gravity. The soldier had not considered legacy when he nodded that morning. He had not imagined consequence beyond the next order, the next mile. Like most decisions made in war, it had been practical, bounded, temporary, and yet here it is. Gratitude finally has words. Not rehearsed, not ceremonial. The man speaks them carefully, aware that language cannot fully contain what he intends to convey. He does not speak only of survival, but of continuity of children born, of work done, of years lived that should not have been available to him. The soldier responds awkwardly at first, then honestly. He admits that he had thought of that night often, though never with certainty, that he had wondered occasionally whether the choice had mattered, or whether it had dissolved immediately into the movement of the war. Hearing the outcome does not transform the memory. It anchors it. They do not speak of heroism, neither uses the word. The soldier resists it instinctively. He describes the decision as small, constrained by circumstance, hardly exceptional. The man does not argue. He understands now that what changed his life did not feel significant at the time it was made. This, too, is part of the lesson. Time closes a long open loop, not with finality, but with alignment. The past and present overlap just enough to clarify one another. What was once uncertainty becomes context. What was once silence becomes shared recollection. They speak also of those who are not present, of others who made similar decisions and never learned their outcomes, of soldiers who did not return home, of civilians who did not survive long enough to ask questions. The meeting carries the weight of those absences without attempting to resolve them. When the visit ends, there is no sense of completion in the conventional sense. Nothing has been fixed or redeemed, but something has been acknowledged that could not be acknowledged before. A truth has been placed where it belongs between two people who now understand the full shape of a moment they once inhabited separately. They part without promises of repetition. Time, after all, is no longer generous. But they part with clarity. The war has finally released one of its quieter consequences into daylight. As the man leaves, he understands that the search which consumed so many years was never truly about confirmation. It was about connection, about allowing gratitude to move from abstraction into human space. That goal has now been met, imperfectly, but sufficiently. History will not record this meeting. No archive will catalog the exchange. It will exist only within the lives of those who took part, and soon only within memory. But that, perhaps, is enough, because the meeting confirms what the war itself often obscures, that beneath strategy and destruction, history is shaped by moments when individuals choose restraint over impulse, recognition over rule, and that sometimes, decades later, time allows those moments to be seen for what they truly were, not heroic in scale, but decisive in consequence. The loop closes not with triumph, but with understanding, and as both men return to their lives, carrying one fewer unanswered question, the war finally relinquishes a small piece of its unfinished business, resolved not by victory or defeat, but by recognition, spoken aloud at last. War reduces lives to moments of decision. Not the moments that appear in communiques or headlines, but the quiet ones that pass without witness. A glance held a second longer than required. A rule bent without explanation. A trigger not pulled. These are the moments that rarely announce themselves as decisive, yet carry consequences that extend far beyond the battlefield. Orders explain behavior, but they do not explain humanity. They describe what must be done. This is not unusual, though it is rarely admitted. Veterans often find that what remains vivid is not the scale of operations or the names of offensives, but the faces that broke through the abstraction of conflict. As civilian encountered unexpectedly, a child whose presence disrupted the clarity of enemy and ally. These encounters resist being absorbed into strategy. They remain human. The boy became one such memory. He was remembered not because he fit the story of the war, but because he interrupted it. He did not behave as an enemy was expected to behave. He did not reinforce the logic of violence. He complicated it, and in doing so, he lingered. History, however, rarely records restraint. It records outcomes. It measures territory gained, casualties inflicted, treaties signed. The decision not to shoot, not to ask, not to enforce these, leave no trace in archives. They are invisible by design, absorbed into the silence between events. This invisibility does not diminish their importance. It only delays their recognition. Meaning, in this story, was not immediate. It was deferred. It took decades, political change, opened archives, and persistent searching before gratitude could find its object. Even then, it arrived imperfectly through partial records and fallible memory. Certainty remained elusive. What emerged instead was something quieter: acknowledgement. The meeting, when it finally occurred, did not sanctify the past. It clarified it. It revealed that a decision made without expectation of consequence had in fact shaped an entire life. Children were born because of it. Work was done. Time was filled. A future unfolded that would otherwise have remained unrealized. This realization did not elevate the soldiers to heroes in their own eyes. If anything, it humbled them. They recognized how accidental the outcome had been, how easily the decision could have gone the other way without violating any order or principle. The boy's survival was not guaranteed by morality alone. It was permitted by circumstance, and yet circumstance required choice. War places individuals inside systems designed to suppress individuality. Uniforms standardize behavior. Language reduces complexity. The enemy becomes a category rather than a person. Within this machinery, hesitation is often portrayed as weakness. But hesitation can also be discernment. It can be the pause that allows humanity to surface before it is buried again. The soldiers did not think they were preserving a future. They thought they were solving an immediate problem with minimal complication. They acted within a narrow frame of reference, unaware of the scale their decision would later assume. This is how most moral choices occur. They do not present themselves as moral. They present themselves as practical, inconvenient, or ambiguous. Only later do they reveal their weight. The boy, who became a man, carried the memory differently. For him, it was not an interruption, but a foundation. His life was built atop moments he did not fully understand until much later. Gratitude remained unresolved for years, not because it was absent, but because it had nowhere to go. When it finally found expression, it did not seek repayment. It sought recognition. Recognition, in the end, was enough. The war that had once defined every movement in his life receded further into history, but it never disappeared entirely. It remained present as a reference point, a reminder that existence itself can hinge on decisions made by strangers whose names may never be fully known. What they carried with them in the years that followed was not pride. It was awareness. Awareness that violence is not inevitable, even when authorized. That restraint is not weakness, even when unobserved. That humanity can persist inside systems designed to erase it not loudly, not heroically, but quietly and without instruction. The soldiers carried this awareness back into civilian life, where it blended into memory rather than identity. They did not speak of it often. There was no need. The war had taught them that some truths are not diminished by silence, only protected by it. The man carried it differently. He carried it as obligation not to glorify the past, but to testify to it. To ensure that the silence surrounding his survival did not become erasure, his search was not about rewriting history. It was about completing a sentence that had been left unfinished. In the end, the story resolves not with triumph, but with proportion. A vast war, millions dead, cities erased, and within it, a series of small decisions that preserved one life. This does not redeem the war. It does not balance its losses. But it reminds us that even within catastrophe, individual choices retain meaning. They thought they were only saving a boy, They were not thinking about decades. They were not imagining grandchildren, careers, or the long arc of a life restored to continuity. They were acting within the narrow margins available to them, guided by instinct, fatigue, and an unspoken recognition of youth standing where it did not belong. But by hesitating, by choosing not to complete the logic of war, they preserved a future. History may never record their restraint. Archives may never list their names beside that moment. But the future they preserved existed nonetheless, carrying forward into years the war itself could not reach, and that is the final measure of what they carried with them. Not medals, not recognition, but the quiet knowledge that in a world organized for destruction, they paused, and because they did, something fragile endured. They laughed once, they never laughed again.